What's going on, guys? Welcome back to WWE Network and Show, where I, Graham G.S. Matthews, break down all the original content you watch on the WWE Network and on Peacock. And today we're talking Season 1, Episode 2 of WWE Evil. And no, I have not forgotten about the show. I have not had a chance to really catch up on the 24 they put up about a month ago, 3 weeks ago on the Rumble, or the Broken Skull sessions with Bully Ray Dudley or Bubba Ray Dudley, whatever the fuck you want to call him. That went up on Good Friday, I think, about a week ago. I have not watched that yet. I have not watched the 24. I thought there was something else. Maybe the third thing I'm thinking of is Evil. I haven't watched any other episodes beyond the Hogan one, before this one anyway, this past week. I am trying to watch one a week and get to them weekly, as I was originally planning on doing. So it has been a good show so far. This Miz one really taught me nothing new at all. The Hogan one was really just the same sort of history and the same sort of stuff that you've heard before. I will be watching them all. I heard each episode is different than the rest. And the Miz one is good. He is one of the better bad guys in WWE's recent history. I don't know about all time, but the Miz is one of the better bad guys in definitely modern era WWE. And again, everything they discuss here was really a lot of the same stuff. Like, I thought I was rewatching the 24 on the Miz. They put up about a year ago on the network, which was great. But any one of us that has been watching for any extended period of time. Now, I think it's a great thing they do these shows on Peacock, and they've really done a great job of branding the show and getting people who are not wrestling fans that I know that have either heard of the show or have watched the show that, enjoyed it. So for wrestling fans, you're really learning nothing new. But that's pretty much what this was. It was like a kind of retelling of the same background and same story, specifically with Miz, stuff we've heard a million times. But I still thought it was a good episode, and that's why I'm probably not going to get into every little minute detail when it comes to Miz's backstory and his, coming up in the business, because we've heard all the same stuff before. But we do get a lot of great talking heads, obviously narrated by John Cena. I don't think I mentioned that last time. Cena narrates the series and does a good job of it. Did he narrate? I thought he narrated the Ruthless Aggression show. I don't think he did. Pretty sure that was Pat McAfee in the second half of the season or whatever. But Cena narrates the show, which is ironic because he never turned heel towards the later part of his career. But we get a lot of talking heads. They get Michelle Beadle on the show, regardless of what your thoughts are on her. They get her analysis on things. Jimmy Smith was great. He looks, I thought, significantly different than he does on Raw commentary. Maybe it's because I've never seen him not in a suit before. But he has a lot of knowledge of WWE, and I thought he was a great talking head for this episode throughout. And, of course, Dolph Ziggler and Morrison and even Danielson. They got Morrison on here and Bryan Danielson probably before Danielson left WWE about a year ago, and it's just archive footage, but I could be wrong about that. Anyway, they kick off with Peter Rosenberg. He was another talking head for the episode, saying that he turns out to be everyone's worst nightmare as far as The Miz goes, and he knows how to make people angry. They talk about how he has confidence and believability, and that's what makes him such a great heel. He started out on The Real World, the MTV show, many, many years ago, and it was on that show that he created the character called The Miz. His real name is Mike Mizanin, but he created The Miz on that show because he was a big wrestling fan, and it really just kind of happened organically, and people grew to know him as The Miz on the show, and he would kind of pretend he was The Rock and all this other sort of stuff. But he always aspired to seriously be a WWE superstar at the end of the day. So he chased that dream, joined Tough Enough in the early 2000s, failed at winning the show. I think he was the runner-up in that third or fourth season, but he did end up getting a hosting gig with WWE. That's not what he wanted. When he was told by Vince that Vince wanted him to be the Ryan Seacrest of WWE, which is a great comparison for Miz, because he does do that with a lot of stuff like Miz TV and shit like that. He didn't exactly want to hear that because he wants to be the guy. He wants to be the top star, which he was never going to be. But, he's had a lot of success, all things considered. But he didn't want to be the host of WWE. He wanted to be the WWE champion. But still, he wanted to capitalize on every opportunity that was thrown his way. And that's exactly what he did. He managed to make people hate him. And he wanted people to see him get beat. And then eventually transition into an in-ring role, which is exactly what he wanted. Even JBL on commentary at that point in the mid-2000 SmackDown era, JBL outright said that he hated him on commentary, like probably not even in character, he just hated Mike. And JBL was a notorious and infamous heel commentator on the show. So for him to say that he hated Miz was really saying a lot. Miz knew he had to pay his dues, and he got kicked out of the locker room. We've heard this story a million times, but he got kicked out of the locker room for eating chicken over someone's bag, and they don't say who it was. I always thought it was Hardcore Holly. I had heard from somewhere else at some other point that it was actually Chris Benoit. Maybe it wasn't his bag. Maybe he was the one that kicked Miz out of the locker room. But either way, he had to be punished for that by being kicked out of the locker room for 6 months. And he had to change in the public bathroom before shows, which is crazy. Miz was always a button pusher even as a person. So like wearing a fedora backstage and wearing like the bandana and shit, people thought he looked like an idiot and they told him that it looked terrible. So he did that exactly on TV and it led to great heat and him kind of forming his own identity for himself during the Dirt Sheet days. Speaking of which, he found a partner in John Morrison who was kind of in a similar spot at that point, trying to find his own singles identity. And Morrison, who we hear from here on the show, and comments that were probably filmed before he got fired last year, he said that he found out that there was more to Mike than just The Miz. And they would always show up early at the shows to film the Dirt Sheet, and it was really their way, their avenue of telling the audience more about their own characters, because they weren't getting a lot of mic time or great character development on the shows themselves, that being ECW at that point. So it worked out. The Dirt Sheet was entertaining. I remember watching it as a kid, getting into wrestling 14 years ago and watching the Dirt Sheet on WWE.com or their YouTube channel or whatever it was. And this was before YouTube for WWE really blew up into what it was and what it is today. But yeah, eventually in 2009, they went to Raw, or he went to Raw rather. He got drafted to Raw and broke up with John Morrison that exact same night. I remember that like it was yesterday. And it was a very cool moment. So in the weeks that followed, he called out John Cena. And Miz said here that Cena would be out for 8 weeks, and no, just because Cena's the narrator, he does not comment on his own storyline, which would be weird for him to make it first person. They kind of avoid Cena's narration during this point of the documentary. But Miz was calling him out every week on Raw. And I remember this, and I'm thinking while watching this, well, why wasn't Cena there? Was he filming a movie? Or like, I know 12 Rounds 2 or 12 Rounds 1 just came out. Why wasn't he there? And then I remembered he was there. So Cena wasn't there for like a good few weeks when the feud first started because he had just gotten thrown through the big spotlight of Backlash by Big Show. So that's why he wasn't in the show for a week or two. But Cena was around at that point because he was feuding with Big Show. And Big Show is beating up Cena, so Cena couldn't come out at other points in the show to confront Miz. So it's not like Cena took time off, because I remember us getting Cena and Big Show at Judgment Day, and again at One Night Stand, or the Extreme Rules show, whatever. So Cena was around, he just wasn't wasting his time on Miz until about June, when they had their match at the Bash. Not the Great American Bash, it was just called the Bash, and it was a straight-up squash. They acknowledged that here, and I think they talked about this in his 24, but Cena squashed Miz, and it was over in about 5 minutes. Miz said he didn't even think he got any offense in at all. And from there, though, he really rebounded, went on a run for himself, won the United States Championship in October of 2009, won the tag team titles, won Money in the Bank, cashed in Money in the Bank to become WWE Champion by November of 2010. And I think it was Dolph who talked about how Miz can make the crowd boo him no matter what. Regardless of the circumstance, he can turn a crowd against him. So they talk about the build to WrestleMania 27, how more people were invested in The Rock and Cena going into that show than Cena and Miz, because Rock had just came back on the Valentine's Day edition of Raw in February. WrestleMania 27 was in April. So they really spent a majority of that build on Rock and Cena and getting people excited for that than they were Cena and Miz. And I remember that because I was watching intently at that time. And I completely agree. Way more people were excited about Cena and Rock than Cena and Miz, even though Miz was WWE Champion for a while. The reason they bring this up was because there was that one segment on Raw in the build-up to that match. And I will agree, this was a great segment. I'm glad they spent some time on this. And I wish they had done more of this throughout the documentary. Although this was 50 minutes. It doesn't sound like it because I'm breezing through it here, but it's a lot of padding and filler, really. But there was that one segment on Raw leading up to the Mania match where Miz came out dressed as The Rock. And Rock wasn't advertised to be there, so people went nuts when the music hit. Place came unglued. And he waited for himself to come out, and Vince told him to wait even longer. So they kind of drew the pop out a little bit more, and they got a second pop out of it. It was a while before people realized that it wasn't Rock. And I fell for it too. Initially, it looked like The Rock. From afar, it looked like The Rock. But when they zoomed in, it was clear that it was The Miz, just in a bald cap, and they did a great job of it. And they really recall that segment and how great of a heel Miz was for doing that. And again, I wish they had honed in on more segments he did like that in the remainder of his run. Because he's had other great heat-seeking moments like that, but they didn't really single them out like they did that one. So anyway, he did retain the title at WrestleMania 27, and I'm glad they mentioned that, but it didn't really matter because it was Rock who helped him win, and Rock laid Miz out anyway. So, I mean, it was a big win for Miz, but the crowd didn't really give a fuck about Miz and Cena itself, and they didn't show Rock helping Miz. They don't talk about that at all. So fast forward a couple of years, they completely gloss over the face turn in late 2012 and throughout 2013. It was in 2014 he took some time off to film The Marine 4. And he came back with a new character. And I don't know if he's ever talked about this in interviews because he's always in character when he does interviews. But he mentioned here how the whole point of that character was to come back as an A-list actor who thought he was an A-list actor, even though he's not, who only did straight-to-DVD movies. And everyone hates those sort of people, and that's exactly what he wanted to emulate. I don't think he genuinely thinks these movies are great at all. Like, we don't really get to see Mike the person at all. We always see on shows, on interviews, on the show itself, The Miz. But he really, like, Mike actually came through in this Evil episode, which I thought was cool. And he mentioned how, yeah, like, listen, these movies are nothing special, and it was funnier for me to act like I thought they were something special, even though they weren't. And he was really inspired in that respect by Andy Kaufman. They show a lot of footage of Andy from his feud with Jerry Lawler back in the day, so I was really happy they mentioned that. They referenced the Talking Smack promo, which they had to mention because that was such an iconic moment in his career, if not the highlight. And not winning the main event of WrestleMania, but rather this Talking Smack promo, because that got a lot more people talking about The Miz than winning at WrestleMania 27. But they replay almost the entire promo where he went off, seemingly unscripted, although it was kind of more of a work shoot, if anything. Mick Foley said he thought it was real. And Miz really used that promo to solidify his character. And Miz said, someone asked him, one of the producer asks him here on the show, did you feel good after that? And Miz said, no. I felt like I was out of control, and I felt insecure after that, which was interesting. He says his character does what he does, dresses the way that he does, compensates in other ways because, like, as far as dressing up and talking with big words and shit, because he's insecure. Like, the psychology of the character that Miz adds here, I don't think I've ever really heard him talk about in other interviews or on the show or whatever. Like, ever. Maybe not even in that 24. So I thought that was really cool. I didn't really think about it like that. It makes sense. And some of the best type of performers don't really have to spell it out for the audience, but Miz does a great job with that, and he mentioned that here. But yeah, he was insecure after that Talking Smack promo, he said. We hear a lot from Maurice, who said that was Mike, that wasn't Miz, and, you know, she was nervous being on set for that because it got out of control. And anyway, so Miz wants to be seen as a star, and that's why he's always overcompensating by dressing up in fancy suits and doing stuff like that. And he's always consistently been in the picture, which is a fact. Whether you like or hate The Miz, he is always in the picture doing something more often than not. Even if he's at the bottom of the card, he is still almost always doing something. And he understands character development. Peter Rosenberg says that Miz would have made it to WWE regardless of the reality TV show stuff. And Miz says, yeah, I get praise now and it's cool, it's a nice feeling, but he still gets people telling him to this day that he doesn't belong here and he doesn't deserve the success that he has. And that eats away at him, and it motivates him to be the best version of himself every time he's out there. So I thought that was a great note to end on. It was better than expected, this episode. I don't want to say it was bad or that I had low hopes, but early on I figured, wow, this really is just a recreation of the 24 they did on him. Not 3 years ago, not 5 years ago. It was 1 year ago. They did that 24 on Miz. So this really was a lot of redundant information, but some of the psychology that he offers on his character, I thought was fantastic. Like, we need more of Mike and less of Miz, I think. And people like to rag on the guy, and I get it, it's funny. But it's like Taker. Like, we've seen him in character for long enough. We need to see more of this behind-the-scenes stuff as far as why he does what he does. It's time for that chapter of his career, and we got that here, and I thought it was great. And I even talked to someone like a week or two ago who was not a wrestling fan that mentioned the Evil episode, that mentioned this show, and I was talking about Hogan because they were an older person. I figured they would know Hogan. They said they watched the Miz episode, and they said, I didn't know he was on Real World, or I know him from Real World, or whatever. And I'm like, oh, wow, I didn't think you watched the show, so that's pretty cool. But yeah, I'm enjoying the Evil series so far. It's not must-see by any means, no pun intended with this being the Miz episode, but it's been enjoyable. It's a lot of the same stuff. You're not going to learn anything new, but it is good, solid stuff, and I look forward to the next couple of episodes. I think Sasha Banks might be the next one, so like I said, my current plan is to review one a week. We've kind of gotten away from that just because it's been so busy lately, but I am hoping to watch one a week. There's 8 episodes. This is only episode 2, so you're going to get some Evil episode reviews for a while here on the channel every week. So keep an eye out for those. But in the meantime, guys, have a great week. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, rather. I'm Graham G.S. Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.